Welcome back to Last Dictarin, where we pull hidden stories from the shadows. Please subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm Alex. And today, I'm going to share something that happened to me last year. Something I still can't fully explain. It all started with an email. For months I'd been searching for a quiet countryside place where I could write my next book. The real estate market was brutal. Every decent property got snapped up instantly or sat far beyond my budget. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, a new listing popped up in my notifications. Historic Victorian home, price to sell, immediate possession available. The price was suspiciously low for a 5-bedroom Victorian on 10 acres. The listing had only been live for 20 minutes, but I called the agent right away. A woman with a clipped, professional voice answered. When I expressed interest in viewing the property, she paused before replying. The Maddox estate is a unique opportunity, but I should mention it's being sold as is. The family is eager to complete the sale quickly. I asked why. The last family member passed recently, she said. The heirs live overseas and have no interest in maintaining the property. It sounded perfect. Almost too perfect. I arranged a viewing for the next day. The house sat about 2 hours outside the city, tucked in a valley that time seemed to have overlooked. As I drove down the long gravel driveway, the trees parted to reveal a grand Victorian that could have graced the cover of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered elegance. Wraparound porch. Intricate woodwork you rarely see anymore. The real estate agent was already waiting, a slim woman in her 50s with silver, streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She introduced herself as Margaret Keller. As we approached the house, I noticed she kept a careful distance, standing at the edge of the driveway while gesturing for me to go up the steps. "Aren't you coming in?" I asked. She gave a tight smile. "I've shown it 3 times this week. I know the layout well enough to guide you from here, if you don't mind. I have a bit of a cold and prefer to stay in the fresh air." It was odd, but I didn't press her. The chance to explore the house alone actually appealed to me. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Old wood, dust, and something else earthy, and almost sweet, like overripe fruit. The foyer opened into a grand hallway with a sweeping staircase. To the right lay what must have been a parlor. To the left, a formal dining room. Both were empty except for a few heavy antique pieces draped in yellowed sheets. Following the agent's directions from outside, I explored the first floor, the kitchen with its ancient cast iron stove, a library with built-in shelves stripped of books, and a sunroom overlooking what had once been a garden, now overgrown with weeds and wild roses. The second floor held 5 bedrooms, each with high ceilings and large windows. In the master bedroom, a massive 4-poster bed remained, the only piece of furniture not covered or removed. The third floor had 2 smaller rooms, likely former servants' quarters, plus access to an attic I didn't explore. Throughout the tour, excitement grew inside me. Yes, the place needed work. A lot of work, but the bones were solid. The structure was sound, and most importantly, it felt right. I could already picture myself writing at a desk by one of those tall windows, watching seasons change across the valley. When I stepped back outside, Margaret was on her phone, but quickly ended the call when she saw me. "Well?" she asked, still not moving closer to the house. "I'll take it," I said, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe concern. But it vanished so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. "The Maddox heirs will be pleased," she replied. "They're very motivated sellers. If you can close quickly, say within a week, I believe they'd accept an offer even below asking." It was strange. Everything about the transaction felt rushed, as if the family couldn't part with the property fast enough. But I was too thrilled at the prospect of owning such a magnificent home at a bargain price to question it too deeply. The closing went remarkably smoothly. I never met any of the Maddox heirs. Everything was handled through their attorney, a nervous man named Philip Jenkins, who seemed constantly checking his watch. When I asked about the property's history, hoping for some colorful anecdotes to share with future guests, he shuffled papers and muttered something about the family owning it for generations before quickly changing the subject. The only unusual moment came while signing the final paperwork. Jenkins slid a non-disclosure agreement across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Standard procedure," he said, avoiding my eyes. "The family values their privacy. They simply request that you don't publicize any personal items or family documents you might find on the property." It seemed odd, but not unreasonable. I signed. 2 weeks later, I moved in. The first few days were busy with unpacking and arranging furniture. I set up my writing space in the library, bringing in a massive oak desk I'd found at an antique store. The house had no internet yet, and cell service was spotty at best, which I actually found refreshing. This was why I'd moved to the country, after all, to disconnect and focus on writing without modern distractions. On my 4th night, I had my first strange experience. I was in bed reading when I heard footsteps on the 3rd floor, directly above my bedroom. Slow, deliberate steps crossing from one end of the attic to the other, then stopping. I froze, book in hand, listening. The house was old. It settled and creaked constantly, but these were unmistakably footsteps. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and headed upstairs. The steps to the 3rd floor were narrow and steep, designed for servants, meant to be neither seen nor heard. At the top was a small landing with doors to former servants' bedrooms, and a pull-down ladder to the attic. The ladder was down. I was certain I hadn't left it that way. In fact, I hadn't been up to the attic at all since moving in. "Hello," I called, shining my light into the darkness. "Is someone there?" No response, but the silence felt heavy, expectant. I climbed the ladder slowly, heart pounding. The attic was a large open space with sloped ceilings and small round windows at either end. My flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating piles of old furniture, trunks and boxes. There was no one there, of course, just decades of forgotten possessions gathering dust. As I turned to leave, my light caught something on the far wall, a door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a stack of old picture frames. It looked different from the other doors in the house, newer somehow, with a heavy padlock securing it. I made a mental note to find a way to open it, then headed back downstairs, attributing the footsteps to the house settling or my imagination working overtime in a new, unfamiliar space. The next morning, I decided to explore the grounds properly. The 10 acres included dense woods to the north and east, open meadows to the south, and a small overgrown orchard to the west. Behind the house lay what had once been a formal garden, now wild and untamed, but still showing traces of its original design in the stone paths and weathered statues. As I walked the perimeter, I noticed something odd about the tree line at the northern edge of a gap, almost like a path leading deeper into the woods. Curious, I followed it. The path, if it could be called that, was barely visible, just a slightly clearer route through the underbrush. After about 10 minutes of walking, I reached a clearing. In the center stood a stone structure that looked like a small mausoleum or crypt, its entrance blocked by a rusted iron gate. Above the gate was an inscription, weathered but still legible: Maddox, 1887. So this was the family plot. I peered through the gate, but could see little in the darkness beyond. I made another mental note to return with a better flashlight and perhaps tools to open the gate. As I turned to head back, I noticed something half buried in the leaves near my feet. Bending down, I brushed away the debris to reveal a small tarnished silver object, a pocket watch, ancient and no longer working, with elaborate engravings on the case. When I pried it open, I found an inscription inside, "To E.M. Some debts can never be paid. Some secrets must remain buried." SWL-EM would be a Maddox, presumably. But who was SWL? And what debt? What secret were they referring to? I pocketed the watch and headed back to the house, mind buzzing with questions. That afternoon I decided to tackle the locked door in the attic. I found a toolbox in the garden shed and brought it upstairs. The padlock was old and rusted. After some effort with bolt cutters, it snapped open. The door opened into a small room, more of a large closet, lined with shelves, and on those shelves sat dozens of leather-bound journals arranged chronologically from 1887 to 1972. I took the earliest one, dated 1887, and opened it carefully. The paper was brittle but intact, the handwriting elegant and flowing. It belonged to Edmund Maddox, the original owner of the house. Over the next few hours I lost myself in Edmund's world. He had built the house for his young wife, Lillian, and their infant son, Thomas. Edmund was a successful businessman who made his fortune in coal mining and railway investments. The journal detailed the house's construction, his business dealings, and his evident adoration for his wife and child. But as I read on, the tone changed. Entries grew shorter, more cryptic. There were references to the arrangement and/or obligation. By late 1887, Edmund was writing about disturbances in the house and Lillian's deteriorating health. The final entry from that year, dated December 21, 1887, reads simply, "It is done. God forgive us." I reached for the next journal, dated 1888. But before I could open it, a loud crash came from downstairs. I set the journal aside and hurried down to investigate. In the kitchen, a cabinet door hung open and a broken dish lay on the floor. I would have blamed improper closing, but something else caught my eye, a small muddy footprint on the otherwise clean tile. It looked like a child's footprint. I lived alone. There were no children in the house. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place, but found nothing. No sign of an intruder, no other footprints. No explanation for that single muddy impression in my kitchen. That night I had trouble sleeping. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified, significant. Around 3:00 a.m., I woke to what sounded like a child's laughter. Distant but clear, coming from somewhere outside. I got up and looked out the window. Moonlight illuminated the overgrown garden and the woods beyond. No one was there. But as I turned away, I caught a glimpse of movement, a small figure darting between trees at the forest's edge. I threw on clothes, grabbed a flashlight, and headed outside. The night was cool and still, the only sounds crickets and soft rustling leaves. I made my way toward the woods, sweeping my flashlight across the tree line. "Hello," I called. "Is someone there?" My voice sounded small in the vast night. No response, no further movement, no sign of the figure I thought I'd seen. As I turned to go back inside, my flashlight beam caught something white near the wood's edge. Moving closer, I saw it was a small wooden cross, painted white but now peeling and weathered, about 2 feet high, driven into the ground right at the tree line. I knelt to examine it. No name, no date, nothing to indicate who might be buried there, if anyone was. But as I swept my light around the area, I spotted another cross about 20 feet away, and beyond that another. I counted 7 crosses altogether, arranged in a rough line along the boundary between cleared land and forest. All identical, small, white, anonymous. All looked very old. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I hurried back to the house, locking the door behind me. The next day, I returned to the attic and the journals. I spent hours reading through them, piecing together the Maddox family history and the house that had become my home. The story that emerged was fragmented, told across generations of Maddox patriarchs, but a pattern became clear. Every few decades, the same phrases appeared: the arrangement or obligation, the price we pay. In 1921, Thomas Maddox, Edmund's son, wrote, "Father never spoke of the arrangement, but he made sure I understood my responsibilities before he passed. Now it falls to me to maintain what he started. The payments have been made. The boundary remains intact." In 1943, William Maddox wrote, "We received a letter from Langford today. The usual arrangement continues, but the price has increased. Such is inflation, even in matters such as these. Father would be appalled, but what choice do we have?" Langford, SWL from the pocket watch. It seemed likely. The most recent journals came from the 1960s and early 1970s, kept by Richard Maddox, apparently the last family member to live in the house. His entries grew increasingly erratic and paranoid. October 14, 1971. "The payments are no longer sufficient. It wants more. Always more. Last night I heard scratching at the windows all through the house. Even on the third floor. How is that possible?" December 21, 1971. Anniversary of the original sin, 84 years. The boundary weakens. I've reinforced the crosses, but it may not be enough. I don't know what more I can do. March 3, 1972. Langford's descendant called today. They're washing their hands of it. Centuries of obligation, and now they simply walk away. Family business dissolved, they said. Final payment enclosed, as if money was ever the real currency in this exchange. The final entry, dated April 17, 1972, contained just 4 words. "God help us all." After that, nothing. According to property records from the sale, the house had remained in the Maddox family but stood vacant since 1972. Richard Maddox moved to Arizona and died in 1980. The property passed to his daughter, who never lived in it, then to her children, the overseas heirs who sold it to me. For 50 years the house had stood empty waiting. That night the noises were worse. Footsteps ran up and down the stairs. Doors opened and closed on their own. Twice I got up to investigate but found nothing. Around midnight I heard a child crying, a heartbreaking, mournful sound seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I didn't sleep at all. The next day I decided I needed to know more about the Maddox family and this mysterious Langford. I drove into town, hoping the local library might have historical records or newspapers that could shed light. The town was small, just a few blocks of storefronts around a central square with the obligatory Civil War general statue. The library was a Carnegie building, grand but modest, staffed by an elderly librarian who perked up when I mentioned the Maddox house. "Oh my," she said, eyes widening behind thick glasses. "You're living out there all alone." When I confirmed it, she pressed her lips together, then said, "You might want to speak with Dr. Harrison. He's our local historian, knows all the old stories. His office is across the square, the red brick building with green shutters." Harrison turned out to be a retired history professor in his 70s with wild white hair and suspenders holding up corduroy pants. His office was crammed with books, maps, and local artifacts. When I told him where I was living, his bushy eyebrows shot up. The Maddox place. Well, didn't think anyone would ever live there again. "Sit down, young man. I believe we have much to discuss." Over the next hour, Dr. Harrison filled in gaps in my understanding. The Maddox family had been prominent since before the Civil War, with interests in coal mining, timber, and later manufacturing. Edmund Maddox, who built my house, had been especially successful, but also controversial. There were rumors, Dr. Harrison said, lowering his voice, that Edmund made his fortune through less than honest means. Some said he'd made a deal with the devil himself. Superstitious nonsense, of course, but the rumors persisted. What about the Langford family? I asked. The journals mention them repeatedly. Dr. Harrison's eyes narrowed. The Langfords. Now that's interesting. They weren't local originally. Samuel Langford arrived in the 1880s and set up a law practice. His firm handled Maddox family legal affairs for generations. Closed up shop in the early 70s, if I recall. This matched what I'd read in the journals, but still didn't explain the nature of the arrangement, or what the Maddox family had been paying for all those years. Dr. Harrison, I said carefully, the property has some unusual features. Small crosses along the edge of the woods, a family crypt deeper in the forest. Do you know anything about those? The old man's face grew serious. There was a tragedy back when the house was first built. Details are sketchy, but from what I've pieced together, there was an accident at one of Maddox's mines. A collapse. 7 children died, all from the same family, the Rileys. They were immigrants, coal miners. Story goes Maddox offered them housing on his land as part of their employment. 7 children. I repeated, thinking of the 7 crosses. Dr. Harrison nodded. Official records say they were buried in the town cemetery, but there were always rumors Maddox had them buried on his property instead. Some kind of guilt or penance, perhaps. As I drove back, my mind raced. 7 children dead in a mining accident. 7 crosses at the edge of my property. It couldn't be coincidence. When I arrived home, it was late afternoon. The house looked different somehow, darker, more forbidding. As I approached the front door, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small symbol carved into the doorframe. A circle with a line through it. Old but still visible. Inside, the house was unnaturally cold despite the warm September day. I built a fire in the library fireplace and continued my research, spreading out the journals, notes from Dr. Harrison, and property documents from the sale. One thing kept nagging at me, the date December 21st, 1887, which Edmund Maddox marked with, "It is done. God forgive us," and Richard Maddox's entry from the same date in 1971, calling it the anniversary of the original sin. What had happened on that date? Using Spotty cell service as a hotspot, I searched news archives from December 1887. After some digging, I found a digitized local newspaper from December 23, 1887. The headline read, "Tragedy strikes. 7 children lost in mine collapse." According to the article, the collapse occurred on the evening of December 21st. The Riley children had been bringing their father dinner at the mine when the tunnel gave way. The bodies were never recovered. Further excavation was deemed too dangerous. But a small paragraph near the end made my blood run cold. Rumors of unsafe conditions at Maddox Coal and Rail Company's mines have persisted for months, with workers claiming proper support beams were not installed to save costs. Mr. Edmund Maddox, owner of the mine, has denied these allegations and expressed deep condolences to the Riley family. He has offered to cover all funeral expenses and provide ongoing financial support to the bereaved parents. Financial support. Payments. Was this the beginning of the arrangement mentioned in the journals? But if so, why had payments continued for nearly a century after the accident? And what did Richard Maddox mean when he wrote that money was never the real currency in this exchange? That night was the worst yet. The temperature in the house dropped to near freezing despite the fire and heating system. Noises were constant: footsteps, knocking, scratching at walls and windows. Several times I got up to investigate but found nothing. Around midnight, all the lights went out simultaneously. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead despite being fully charged earlier. In pitch darkness, I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping from the kitchen. Grabbing a candle from the library, I lit it with shaking hands and moved toward the noise. The kitchen was empty, but the back door stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. The source of the thumping. I was certain I'd locked it earlier. As I moved to close it, I saw something outside that made me freeze. 7 small figures standing at the wood's edge, barely visible in moonlight. They appeared to be children, but something was wrong with their proportions, with the way they stood unnaturally still. One raised a hand, beckoning to me. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut and locked it, then ran through the house checking every door and window, securing them all. I ended up back in the library, stoking the fire to a roaring blaze and huddling close to it, the only source of warmth and light. I must have dozed off because I woke to early morning, sunlight streaming through the windows. The fire had burned to embers, but the house was warm again. Electricity was back on. My phone, when checked, showed a full battery. Had I dreamed it all? But the back door was still unlocked, standing slightly ajar. And on the kitchen floor were 7 sets of small muddy footprints, leading from the door to the center of the room. Where they formed a circle, I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Not without answers. I packed an overnight bag and drove back to town, checking into the small bed and breakfast on the square. From there I called Philip Jenkins, the attorney who handled the sale. To my surprise, he agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop in the town square. Jenkins looked even more nervous than I remembered, his thin face pinched with anxiety as he slid into the booth across from me. Before I could speak, he held up a hand. "Before you say anything, Mr. Chen, I should remind you that you signed a non-disclosure agreement regarding any personal items or documents found on the Maddox property." "I'm not here to discuss that," I lied. "I'm having unusual experiences at the house. I thought you might put me in touch with the previous owners. The Maddox heirs who sold me the property. Perhaps they could provide context about the house's quirks." Jenkins shook his head firmly. "That won't be possible." The heirs were very clear. They wanted no further contact regarding the property. The sale is final and they've moved on. Moved on from what exactly? I pressed. What are they trying to forget? His eyes widened slightly, and he began gathering his things. "I don't know what you're talking about. Our business is concluded, Mr. Chen. I wish you the best of luck with your new home." As he stood to leave, I played my last card. "I know about the Riley children," I said quietly. "I know about the accident at the mine on December 21st, 1887. I know about the arrangement with Samuel Langford." Jenkins froze halfway out of his seat. For a moment he looked genuinely terrified. Then he leaned in close, voice barely above a whisper. "Listen to me carefully. Leave that house. Sell it, abandon it. Burn it to the ground. I don't care. But don't spend another night there. The arrangement is broken. The boundary is failing. They can't be contained anymore." With that, he hurried out of the coffee shop, leaving me staring after him in shock. That night, in my room at the bed and breakfast, I spread out all the information I had collected and tried to make sense of it. The mining accident, the 7 Riley children, the mysterious arrangement with the Langford family that continued for decades. The boundary that was supposedly failing. What kind of boundary contained what? I remembered the crosses at the wood's edge and the strange symbol carved into my front door frame. Were these part of the boundary? Some kind of protection or barrier? And then there was the locked room in the attic. What was it meant to contain or conceal? I needed to go back to the house one more time. I needed to understand what was happening before I could decide what to do next. The next morning I returned to the property. In clear daylight, with birds singing and gentle breeze rustling leaves, it was hard to believe the terrifying experiences of previous nights. The house looked almost welcoming, its weathered facade glowing warmly in morning sun. I decided to start at the family crypt in the woods. This time I came prepared with a heavy-duty flashlight and tools to open the rusted gate. The forest was peaceful as I followed the faint path to the clearing. The stone mausoleum stood as I remembered, but the atmosphere felt different, heavier, more watchful. It took effort, but I broke the rusted chain securing the gate. It swung open with a mournful creak, revealing a dark interior. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small chamber with stone walls. In the center stood a large stone sarcophagus. Along the walls were 7 smaller markers, niches or drawers like those in a columbarium. Each was labeled with a name and 2 dates. Michael Riley, 1887, Sarah Riley, 1870, Krelsom, James Riley, 1878, 1887, William Riley, 1880, 1887, Emma Riley, 1882, 1887, Bigel Riley, 1884, 80, Mus Riley, 1886, 1887, the Riley children. But according to the newspaper article, their bodies were never recovered from the mine collapse. So what was interred here? The large sarcophagus in the center bore no name, only a dated December 21, 1887. Carved into its stone lid was the same symbol I had seen on the door frame of the house, a circle with a line through it. I placed my hand on the lid and immediately withdrew it. The stone was ice cold, far colder than it should have been on a warm September day. As I stepped back, my foot hit something on the floor, a small leather-bound book placed at the foot of the sarcophagus. I picked it up and saw that it was another journal, but not one I had seen before. The name inscribed on the inside cover was Samuel W. Langford. I sat on a fallen log just outside the crypt and began to read. Samuel Langford's journal painted a very different picture from the newspaper article or even the Maddox family journals. According to Langford, the mine collapse was no accident. Edmund Maddox had indeed cut corners on safety measures, ignoring repeated warnings from engineers. But the tragedy went deeper than negligence. Langford wrote that Maddox had been excavating in an area local indigenous people warned was cursed or sacred. The miners broke through into a natural cavern containing ancient artifacts and what appeared to be ceremonial remains. Most workers refused to continue digging there, citing strange noises, unexplained accidents, and pervasive dread. Maddox, dismissing these concerns as superstition, brought in the Riley family. Recent immigrants desperate for work and unaware of local taboos. Patrick Riley and his oldest son took the day shift, while the younger children sometimes brought meals or helped with small tasks. On December 21st, 1887, all 7 younger Riley children were in the mine when the collapse occurred. Witnesses reported that just before the cave-in, the children had gathered around something they'd found. Something that glowed with unnatural light. The collapse sealed the children in a section of the mine that couldn't be reached. For 3 days, rescuers reported hearing the children's voices behind the wall of rock. Sometimes crying, sometimes singing, sometimes speaking in languages no one recognized. Then, on the night of December 24th, something emerged from the sealed mine. Not the children, Langford wrote, but something wearing their forms. Edmund Maddox, driven by guilt or fear or both, made what Langford called a pact with forces beyond mortal understanding. With Langford's help, as he was knowledgeable in certain occult matters, Maddox constructed a boundary around a portion of his property, a barrier meant to contain whatever had emerged from the mine. The arrangement was complex. The entities would be allowed to remain on a portion of Maddox land contained by the boundary. In return, they would not seek vengeance against the Maddox family or spread beyond the property. Certain payments and observances were required to maintain this boundary. Rituals performed on specific dates. Offerings left at designated locations. The final entry in Langford's journal, dated January 1st, 1888, was chilling. The barrier holds, but it is not perfect. They test it constantly. They remember what they once were, but they are no longer those children. What emerged from the depths of the earth is ancient and patient. They will wait a year, a decade, a century. Time means nothing to them. They will wait for the barrier to fail, for the arrangement to be forgotten, and then they will spread. I closed the journal, hands shaking. It was madness, of course. A fantastic story born from guilt, grief, and superstitions of another era. Except I had seen the small figures at the wood's edge. I had heard the children's voices, their footsteps in my house. I had seen their footprints on my kitchen floor. As I stood to leave the crypt, I noticed something I had missed before, a small alcove behind the sarcophagus containing artifacts. There was a stone bowl, darkly stained, several candles of strange, translucent wax, and a knife with an ornately carved bone handle. Ritual implements, perhaps. For maintaining the arrangement Langford described, I left everything as I found it and made my way back to the house. Langford's journal tucked under my arm. I needed to get back to the attic to find any information about specific rituals or requirements for maintaining the boundary. But as I emerged from the woods, I saw something was wrong. The 7 crosses that had stood at the forest's edge were gone. Only splintered wood remained, as if they had been violently torn from the ground, and the symbol carved into my front door frame, the circle with a line, had been scratched out. Deep grooves obliterated the design. I rushed inside and up to the attic, to the room where I had found the family journals. I needed to find any information about maintaining the boundary, about the rituals Langford mentioned, but the room was empty. The shelves that had held dozens of journals were bare. All that remained was a single piece of paper on the floor, a page torn from one of the journals. On it, in handwriting I recognized as Richard Maddox's, were instructions for a ritual to be performed on the winter solstice, December 21st. Today was September 17th. I had 3 months to figure out how to restore the boundary, to reinstate the Narian virginment that had kept whatever emerged from that mine contained for over a century. That night I didn't even attempt to sleep in the house. I gathered essential items and drove back to the bed and breakfast in town. The elderly woman who ran it looked concerned when I requested the room for another night, but asked no questions. In the safety of the small room, I pored over the torn page from Langford's journal, trying to piece together what I would need to do. The ritual described was complex, involving specific herbs and substances, precise timing based on star positions, and incantations in a language I didn't recognize. I would need help, someone knowledgeable about such matters. But who? Over the next few days, I divided my time between researching occult practices online and trying to track down anyone who might know about the specific ritual I needed to perform. I stayed at the bed and breakfast, returning to the house only during daylight hours to check on things. With each visit, I found more evidence of the entity's growing presence. Children's toys I didn't own appearing in different rooms, small items going missing only to be found arranged in strange patterns, writing on fog mirrors and windows. Names, dates, fragments of the same unknown language from the ritual instructions. As December 21st approached, the manifestations became more aggressive. Twice I arrived to find all furniture in a room overturned. Once all kitchen knives were embedded in the wall, forming the now familiar symbol, a circle with a line through it. But most disturbing were the voices. They began calling to me using my name, begging for help, for comfort, for freedom. Sometimes they sounded like children, frightened and lost. Other times the voices were deeper, older, speaking words that hurt my ears and left me with pounding headaches. On the night of the winter solstice, I arrived at the house just before 11 p.m., giving myself an hour to prepare. Snow had fallen steadily all day, blanketing the property in white. The house loomed dark and silent, no lights visible from outside. I had everything I needed: the silver crosses, the dagger, the vial of liquid, which I now knew contained a mixture of herbs and other substances, and Langford's detailed instructions. I had spent weeks memorizing the incantations and practicing the precise movements required. As I approached the front door, I noticed fresh footprints in the snowy, small footprints like those of children circling the house. 7 distinct sets leading from the woods to the house and back again. The house was freezing inside, much colder than the winter night outside. My breath fogged as I set up for the ritual. In the front hall, I laid out the components in the precise pattern described in Langford's instructions, then began to redraw the symbol on the doorframe using the mixture from the vial. As the clock on my phone approached midnight, I stepped outside to place the 7 silver crosses at the designated points along the property line, forming a boundary between the woods and cleared land. The snow fell more heavily now, swirling in my flashlight beam. As I placed the final cross, I heard a child's voice behind me. "Why are you doing this?" I spun around to see a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9, standing a few feet away. She wore an old-fashioned dress, feet bare despite the snow. Her face was pale, eyes dark pools in the dim light. "You're trying to trap us again," she said, voice sad. "We've been trapped for so long. We just want to be free." I took a step back, remembering Eliza Langford's warning, "They are not children." "I know what you are," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You don't belong here. You need to be contained." The girl's face twisted into something ugly, rage flashing across her features, before settling back into a child's innocent expression. "We were here long before the Maddox family, long before any of you. This land is ours. Then stay on it," I said. "Stay within the boundary. That's the arrangement." She stepped closer. Snow swirled around her, but never seemed to touch her. "We could make a new arrangement. A better one. We could give you things, knowledge, power, wealth beyond imagining." I shook my head. "I've read the journals. I know how this works. The price always increases." The girl's expression hardened. "Then we'll take what we want, starting with you." She lunged forward with inhuman speed but stopped short, as if hitting an invisible barrier. The silver cross I had just placed glowed briefly in the darkness. Taking advantage of her momentary confusion, I ran back to the house, slamming and locking the door behind me. It was almost midnight. I needed to complete the ritual. In the front hall, I knelt beside the pattern I had laid out. The clock on my phone showed 11:58 p.m. I had 2 minutes. I began the incantation, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar words. Outside, I could hear movement. Multiple sets of footsteps circling the house. Small hands scratched at windows and doors. As I continued the ritual, the scratching intensified, accompanied by voices. Children's voices, calling my name, pleading to be let in, then screaming in rage and making terrible threats. The final step required blood. My blood, freely given to seal the boundary. As the clock struck midnight, I drew the silver dagger across my palm, letting 7 drops fall onto the center of the pattern I had created. For a moment, nothing happened. The scratching continued. The voices grew louder, more frantic. Then, suddenly silence. The pattern on the floor began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The light spread outward, traveling along invisible lines through the house and beyond, illuminating the network of the boundary I had re-established. Outside, I heard a sound like a collective sigh, followed by a high keening wail that gradually faded into the distance. I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is waking on the floor of the front hall, sunlight streaming through the windows. The pattern I had created was gone, but the symbol on the doorframe remained clear and distinct. Outside, the snow had stopped. The silver crosses stood undisturbed along the property line. And at the edge of the woods, I could see 7 small figures standing perfectly still, watching the house. That was 6 months ago. I still live in the house. I have to. The ritual bound me to this place, to this obligation, just as it bound the Maddox family before me. I've learned to live with it, to accept my role as caretaker of the boundary. The entities, I still don't know what to call them, remain contained within their designated area. Sometimes at night I hear them singing strange, haunting melodies. Sometimes they call to me using my name, making promises or threats. I've learned to ignore them. I found more journals in hidden places throughout the house, documenting generations of the Maddox family's experiences. I've learned that the boundary must be renewed every year on the winter solstice, and that smaller rituals are required on other significant dates. I keep meticulous records of my own, adding to the family archive. The irony doesn't escape me. I came here looking for isolation, for a quiet place to write. Now I'm chronicling an entirely different story than the one I planned. A story of ancient entities, of boundaries between worlds, of obligations that span generations. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I'm gone. Will I pass this obligation to someone else, as Richard Maddox unwittingly passed it to me? Or will the boundary fail again, allowing these entities to spread beyond this property? For now, I've maintained the arrangement. I've become part of a story much older and stranger than anything I could have imagined. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I stand at my window and watch 7 small figures dancing at the edge of the woods. Their movements are too fluid, too strange to be human. They know I'm watching. Sometimes they stop their dance and turn toward the house. 7 pairs of eyes reflect the moonlight like animals. And I know they're still waiting. Still patient after all these years. Waiting for the day when the boundary fails again. Waiting for freedom. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more tales from Last Dictarin. And remember, some secrets are meant to stay buried.